Rwanda commends the regional efforts led by the East African Community and the Southern African Development Corporation, SADC, particularly the joint summit held in Dar es Salaam on 8 February 2025. The joint summit meeting resulted in positive outcomes, including 1, a call for a ceasefire, 2, urgent humanitarian support, and 3, the merger of the Rwanda and Nairobi peace processes to be led by a panel of facilitators from different regions under President Lorenzo. The joint EAC-SADC summit also directed resumption of direct negotiations and dialogue with all state and non-state parties, military and non-military, including the M23. These outcomes were endorsed by an extraordinary AU Peace and Security Council meeting at the head of state level, held on 14 February 2025, as well as the AU Assembly of Heads of State, held on 15th to 16th February 2025. Mr. President, Rwanda appreciates the support of those in this council who value Africa-led solutions. We remain fully engaged in these efforts and continue to support them with good faith and full commitment. However, we must condemn the actions of those, including a DRC, who undermine these efforts by lobbying Western capitals instead of engaging with African leadership and regional mechanisms. Despite the critical nature of the recent regional discussions, the DRC has consistently opted for virtual presence or outright disengagement in these key meetings. While regional leaders gathered at the AU summit to address the Eastern DRC security situation, the president of DRC, President Tshisekedi, was instead seen at the Munich Security Conference, continuing to call for sanctions and lobbying for sanctions against Rwanda rather than engaging in direct dialogues. Other heads of state were sitting in Addis trying to find solutions to these problems. So the biggest beneficiary of these discussions could have been benefited by being in that room. I cannot emphasize this enough. African leadership must drive the resolution of this conflict. Failure to support regional solutions has exacerbated instability in the past. This is why Rwanda calls for the full endorsement of the AU-backed EAC-SADC joint summit outcomes. Furthermore, at the heart of this crisis is a dangerous alliance between the DRC government and external actors, mainly the FDR genocidal militia, who have fueled the ethnic rhetoric and enabled extremism to thrive for decades, but also the Burundian forces, the Sami DRC, as well as European mercenaries. Council members, instead of committing to inclusive dialogue, the DRC has consistently undermined regional mechanisms, pitted regional blocs against each other, disregarded ceasefires, refused dialogue with its own people, and escalated ethnic-based violence. Mr. President, Council members, since the fall of Goma, regional leaders have worked tirelessly to broker peace. Yet, the DRC government has responded by reinforcing its front lines with more troops and Burundian forces. This reckless militarization, coupled with state-sponsored incitement to violence, has created a lawless environment. The uncontrolled distribution of weapons has even led former DRC government-aligned militia to turn against Kinshasa. This we have always said. When a state actor proliferates and distributes weapons to negative armed groups, like the different Wazalendo groups, what you reap is chaos. And what we've seen in terms of the magnitude of loss of life caused by Wazalendo and all these young people who have been given thousands of weapons and mobilized and turned against each other, that's what we reap. Inflammatory statements from DRC officials, such as those made by the Honorable Minister in the previous Council meeting on the 29th January 2025, calling for, and I quote, the streets to take over, have worsened the situation. Indeed, Soon after the Honorable Minister's foretelling in this council, we observed cases of youth mobilization in 2 armed militia in South Kivu, led by known FARDC officers. Arming young civilians in an already unstable context is not only reckless, but an outright incitement to hatred and violence. And there is a lot of misinformation here. When FARDC forces were proliferating arms and including arming children, nobody talked about this. Nobody spoke. And now you see misinformation about execution of children. I repeat, the proliferation of arms by a state actor to negative armed groups, and there are over 250 armed groups documented in DRC. That is a recipe for disaster. And that's the disaster that we continue to see. Arms should be proliferated to designated trained officers and military officers. The situation has deteriorated to the point where we see a lot of humanitarian challenges. Rwanda cannot take the blame for the problems that DRC has faced endemically. As President Kagame stated in Addis Ababa, and I quote, "We have our own problems to deal with. Congo is too big for Rwanda to carry on its back," end of quote. Rwanda has no interest in DRC's internal struggles. Allegations of land grabbing, in quotes, or corrupt or occupation ignore fundamental power imbalances at play in the DRC. Our sole priority has always been and will always remain the security of our borders and the stability of our nation. We have stated over and over again the existential security threat that Rwanda faces from DRC. And these we take very seriously. Council members, Rwanda continues to welcome refugees fleeing the violence in the DRC, despite persistent calls from the DRC and its allies to impose sanctions on Rwanda. Ironically, among those crossing into Rwanda are the same security threats we have repeatedly warned this esteemed council about. On 29th January, over 280 foreign mercenaries, along with over 100 Congolese soldiers, crossed into Rwanda territory, exposing the FARDC's long-standing use of foreign fighters with no reaction whatsoever from the international community. Yet, as we have repeatedly said, the use of mercenaries by state actors contravenes the 1989 United Nations Convention and the 1977 OAU Convention, which prohibits and illegalizes the use of mercenaries by states. More concerning is the international community's reluctancy to address the existential threat Rwanda faces, the ethnic cleansing of Congolese Tutsi, and the misinterpretation of the conflict. Instead of acknowledging the DRC's responsibility, blame has been conveniently shifted, first to Rwanda, and now even to former President Joseph Kabila. When will this blame game end? I think someone here has to take responsibility. Reality has always been clear. The M23's resurgence is rooted in decades-long persecution of Congolese communities based on ethnicity, predating Rwanda's current government. Rwanda has consistently warned that the FDR is central to this crisis. Since 2018, over 20 incursions have been launched into Rwanda, particularly in the southern province and in the northwestern region. Despite claims that the FDR is a weakened force, its active collaboration with and financing by FARDC proves otherwise. The DRC government must recognize that its coalition with the FDR destabilizes Rwanda and perpetuates suffering among Congolese civilians. Ignoring the FDR's role is a failure to hold accountable those responsible for exporting extremist ideology beyond Rwanda's borders. But beyond the FDR, Council members, Rwanda is also concerned by a myriad of foreign forces deployed along its borders, namely the Burundian forces that share the same ethnic ideology as the FDLR, Sami DRC, and the remaining mercenaries. We are also concerned by the President of DRC's push for more foreign troops he is currently requesting from other African countries. All those foreign forces need to withdraw from Eastern DRC as they constitute a direct threat to Rwanda's security. In fact, when Goma fell, FARDC, Burundian forces, and FDLR forces turned their weapons on Rwanda, killing 16 innocent civilians and wounding 177 civilians, and destroying their properties and livelihoods. Yet no country condemned this blatant violation of Rwanda's sovereignty. Rwanda has no choice but to strengthen its defense and will continue to do so. Mr. President, on the question of MONUSCO, we have been very, very clear, and Rwanda's position remains: peacekeepers have to be safe, peacekeepers have to be protected, and that is a canon that we respect, and we have said it over and over again. However, transparency is also very important. Information to the Council that is accurate is critical. There is critical information that we believe SRSG Bintu Keita should have shared with the Council on MONUSCO's collaboration with M23, and specifically the outcome of a meeting that was held yesterday between DSRSG, Vivian van der Perl, and the leader of AFC/M23, Colonel Nanga. We believe that that information would have been critical to share so that at least the Council knows. Mr. President, regarding mineral exploitation, the responsible parties are well known who exploit DRC. Rwanda holds no mining concession in the DRC, yet we continue to be falsely accused. The claim that mineral resources fuel this conflict is false and inciting. The M23 issue is about people fighting for their rights and survival, fighting for their inherent citizenship rights and access to their own ancestral property. Rwanda cannot be scapegoated for the DRC's economic dysfunction. It is Congolese officials who benefit most from instability and the corrupt mining sector, whereas Rwanda has always promoted responsible sourcing and formalized trade to curb smuggling and illicit activities in mining. Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains committed to regional mechanisms to neutralize the FDLR and ensure the withdrawal of all foreign forces that threaten our security. These steps are essential for Rwanda's stability and lasting regional peace. Once these conditions are met, Rwanda will adjust its defensive measures accordingly. We urge the DRC to engage genuinely in the EAC SADC peace process and call on the international community to support these Africa-led initiatives rather than imposing counterproductive measures. If sanctions or punitive measures were the solution to this region's problems, Rwanda would be the first to support them. However, history has shown otherwise. These only deepen division and undermine regional peace efforts. To conclude, Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains guided by the firm belief that our region's future depends on unity, shared prosperity, and inclusive peace. The historical and cultural ties between our communities hold untapped potential, and we hope that through dialogue and cooperation, we can bring lasting peace and development this region desperately needs. I thank you.